So this also presents a list of challenges for IT. In many cases, the user challenges introduce additional challenges for IT, right? The user challenges are exponentially greater for IT because you're talking about tens of thousands or hundreds of users that have similar challenges. So PC refresh has historically been a big ticket item, if you will, in terms of the 5-year budget. It's a lot of time investment when you go from XP to 7, 7 to 10, making sure that your apps are compatible, making sure that you've got a rollout strategy for those devices. A larger portion of the IT budget is allocated for purchasing new PCs, which is kind of mind-boggling to think about when you should be investing in more innovative technologies like big data, analytics, IoT, DevOps, IT as a service, those types of more transformational activities. A lot of the money is spent in keeping the lights on and turning over PCs. In many cases, IT replaces the physical PC every 3 to 5 years, making it very expensive, very costly. There's always the tech refresh process that comes in place, but there's also just new operating systems and new delivery methodologies. Corporate laptops pose significant challenges for IT, like I mentioned. So how do you support and service the devices as they travel far and wide? The further that they are from the home office or where IT is based, the more difficult it is to support that endpoint, to secure that endpoint, to maintain compliance on that endpoint. So how do you keep corporate data secure and out of the hands of the unscrupulous criminals, right? Contractors and partner access is always a challenge from an IT perspective as well. So if you have business-to-business relationships that you work with, a lot of times they need to interact with your systems. And if you have a policy that nobody gets on the VPN unless they have a corporate-issued device or organization-issued device, that becomes challenging as you interact with these B2Bs. I've worked with many contractors that they, at home or in their bag, have 3 or 4 devices that they carry around because they have a device specific to each organization that they work with. It's not uncommon. They need access to the applications and the data to be productive. But you don't want to just allow anybody onto your network, because once they're in the front door, it's a whole list of exposures that are presented. You need to deliver the right access, the right contextual access, like we were talking about, to the right people at the right time. Finally, call centers. I don't know if any of you work in organizations that have, a significant presence from a call center or customer service perspective. 15 to 20% or more of your employee base might be in this category. But these are often task workers. They have single function duties. They have sometimes as few as 3 to 5 applications that they interact with at any point in time. But they need consistency. They need reliability. They're measured based on the amount of volume that they're doing in processing those transactions and those customer service tickets. So they contribute generally between 20 to 60% to the total workforce within organizations. And a lot of times they can drive a lot of operational expenses because of support and maintenance of their machines, their systems, and everything else. These users typically access very limited sets of applications, like I mentioned, but they need high performance and high responsiveness when they're accessing these systems because they're processing data and doing that so quickly. So again, back to the increasing complexity. There's the security risks, like we mentioned. As we become more mobile, security risks increase as we take our devices with us. Losing a laptop to theft or misplacement or mismanagement is not always an attempt to breach confidential corporate or organizational data, but every instance will need to be treated as if it were, right? So there's disclosures that need to happen if devices are lost and they had HIPAA data on them or PII data on them. There's disclosures that ultimately impact things like insurance, right? Insurance premiums go up the more disclosures that you have of theft or loss within the organization. And years back, we used to have a lot of organizations saying, well, I'll just do disk-based encryption and I'll do data at rest encryption and the device will never have to be reported. And it's like, no, you still have to report those devices if they have HIPAA or PCI data on, or PII data on them. So with 1 in 10, I mean, that's kind of staggering, but 10% of the laptops that are floating out there have the probability of being lost or stolen at some point in their life. And IT is faced with the challenge of keeping the data secure under any circumstances, like I mentioned. Telecommuting is no longer just working from home in the event of an emergency, but many organizations are implementing telecommuting policies. In many cases, it can be a workplace benefit to give them better flexible work styles like we mentioned, or it can be a cost reduction measure. In order to reduce the cost of real estate, we're going to issue organizational managed systems, allow the people to work from home, and then we can shut down some of our call centers or some of our high real estate type of operations facilities. Extending access to corporate apps to a home environment is not really something that you want to be in the business of doing without a secure methodology, a remote access methodology to do so, because now you're in the business of supporting that home PC and their Facebook account and their YouTubes and everything else that they have on there for personal reasons. So again, creating that demarcation of this is what IT has control over, this is what the person has control over, and having a fine line between those is important. So one of the key drivers of managing the complexity is simply the diversification in device types and operating systems that we're seeing out there. Adding additional form factors, whether it's a mobile device, a tablet, a phablet, right? That was the term I heard the other day. It's a phone tablet. It's kind of a combination of both, so it's a phablet. The convertibles, the laptops, the desktops. Ultimately, that creates more cost to IT because the more variance and the non-standardization that you have, the higher the cost is to support those endpoints. It also creates complexity around securing the device. Securing a Chromebook is very different than securing a Windows device. It's very different than securing a MacBook, right? These all present different challenges, especially if you're going to allow corporate access from these devices. Developing applications for different form factors complicates the application UIs. So you guys, I don't know if anybody in here is either working in an organization that has application development or are an application developer, but the front-end UI element, the UX element, the user experience, that is always different on the different form factors. So simply creating a new UI for every single form factor that might exist out there, it's going to be very costly, it's going to be cost prohibitive, but also time consuming. And it further complicates the application development and test cycles because now you have to do that iterative testing process on every form factor that might be out there. So let's talk about the traditional app and desktop management approach. And I like to think of this, especially in a Windows environment, this is very monolithic in nature. You've got your operating system commingle with your applications commingle with your data. And if you change any one of those pieces, there's a possibility that it causes something else to break. Patch Tuesday has been the bane of IT's existence for years and years and years because you just don't know what's all out there. And if you patch something, it could break an application, it could break the data or the plugins within the applications. And so all of this traditionally is very tightly coupled. The devices, the operating system, the apps, the data, all of it is commingled and tightly coupled together. IT manages everything from the endpoint devices. You have SCCM or Altiris or Landesk or pick your enterprise software delivery solution of choice. That manages the operating system, the device, the firmware, the applications, the data, everything. And virtualization provides benefits to this. So this whole notion of virtualization is really just about abstraction, right? You're abstracting the device, which has an operating system on it, from the data, abstracting that from the applications. And by separating these different components into different containers or isolation elements, you can enable the delivery and management of the applications and the data to multiple devices, to multiple form factors, making it easier to meet the demands of IT without adding additional complexity to that. So the delivery of the applications and the desktops no longer has to be directly related to the physical device, and it enables you to have some freedom of choice when it comes to those form factors and the operating systems and the platforms. And this enters us into this whole era that I would call the era of the disposable device, right? If you have a digital workspace methodology and you have a central access methodology, a remote access methodology that's cloud enabled in sorts, it enables you freedom of choice when it comes to form factors. And there's a lot of new form factors that are coming to the market. Again, a couple years ago, the big push was get me off of BlackBerry, get me onto iPhone, right? Then we saw, iPad was really coming into market and people wanted to take their notes, and then they wanted to be able to do email, and they wanted to do a lot of other things on this alternate form factor that created new challenges for IT. In the top left here, you see a new device that's come to market called the Samsung DeX. And this is all about being a docking station effectively for your Samsung S8 that enables you to dock it and then get Android and access to Windows apps and data on a traditional PC-like experience. Cable in a USB keyboard and mouse, cable in the monitor. You have access to your workspace from that phone, which is effectively powering a remote access connection back to the data center where the services are being provided. Then you have things like the iPad Pro, which came out a little bit ago, which people naturally want to attach Bluetooth keyboards to. Now you can have a mouse connected to that, so when you're accessing Windows apps and data, you can access that through your iPad Pro. Then you have things like the MacBook Pros, of course, people have been using in the enterprise space for years, and IT's always had a challenge of how do we manage Mac in addition to everything else that we have to deal with, right? New devices in the last probably year or two. I don't know if you have seen Raspberry Pis or that kind of thing, but there's this whole Tinker movement to build IoT devices out of Raspberry Pis. They can now be used in an enterprise application to be an endpoint, kind of like a dumb terminal, if you will, or thin client to a powerful backend in the data center. And then you have things like the Chromebook that you see there and traditional thin client devices. This is a device that Intel has been working on for a while, and you've probably seen them for consumer side. This is called a compute stick, and it's a Windows 10 enabled device that has a HDMI port that you can plug in, and then plug in USB keyboard and mouse. It's got Wi-Fi built in, but it's a fully functional Windows 10 device that you can access here. You've got, a Chromebook type of experience as well as more of a traditional laptop Surface Book. And we're seeing this proliferation of devices, and it's going to continue. Things like wearables are going to come about. Things that I'll talk about in a bit, like augmented reality and virtual reality, and the HoloLens that Microsoft has developed. That's actually a Windows 10 system on a chip that's riding inside of the goggles that presents an augmented reality Windows experience inside of the goggles. We're going to see a lot of enterprise or organizational applications. They're actually already adopted pretty well in the federal government space. They're using them in military, different training scenarios and things that they need to walk through where they need to have an overlay of some visual computing aspect onto whatever workspace they're doing it. You might see them in things like oil and gas or GIS or CAD type of applications where you're out in the field and you put on these goggles and it presents a virtual depiction of maybe where your pipelines are if you're out in the field, right? So all of this proliferation of devices enters us into this era of a disposable device. If you adopt this strategy correctly, the device becomes irrelevant. It's just an access point. It's just a device that you use that has a form factor right for that application, but all of the infrastructure, all of the computing, everything that you need to do your job is essentially cloud located, if you will. So what are the driving forces behind this? You can see some of these up here. These are surveys from organizations that have adopted digital workspace strategies. And there's a lot of benefits from simplifying the desktop provisioning. Again, that 3 to 5 year PC refresh cycle has caused a lot of pain from an IT perspective. So a lot of people are just driving towards this to simplify that. How much time does it take to roll out new images, new applications, iterative testing? And then there's this thing that happens in the field, and some of you guys might have experienced this. It's what I would call PC drift or server drift or desktop drift. Everything was built off of that same image, right? So it's single image management, right? except that over time, as new patches are laid down, as Patch Tuesday might, some patches might not apply properly, they might have a different application set. All of a sudden, if you have an organization that has 15,000 devices, you might have 14,999 unique configurations within your environment. And that's what a CTO that we were working with said once about his organization. He said, I'll give it to you that there's at least, or at most, 2 devices in our enterprise that have exactly the same configuration. But the reality is, most of them aren't. So supporting that and operationalizing that while IT is constantly being challenged with driving more value, driving more productivity, that's the challenge that we're looking into here. So the role of Windows now and in the future, everybody likes to say, oh yeah, Microsoft is dead, long live Linux and open source and whoever else, right? But the truth is that Windows and Windows apps and Microsoft, they're going to be around for a very long time. After nuclear fallout, we'll be left with cockroaches and Windows apps. It's just the nature of things, right? So as much as organizations are trying to adopt cloud-native applications, containers, micro applications, the truth is that most enterprises are going to have Windows for a long time. So being able to cloudify Windows is ultimately what a lot of organizations are doing with their digital workspace strategy. The impact of mobility on the digital workspace plays a huge role, as I mentioned. You want contextual awareness so that if you're, say, in a secured location, you don't want to enable that employee to have access to their camera in that location. So having geofencing capabilities to say inside of this perimeter that we define, you can't do text, you can't do camera, you can't do personal email, those types of capabilities. Again, it's more than just about a point technology like enterprise mobility management, but it's more about the strategy and contextuality to make sure that you have the right context for when people need access to certain things. Obviously, there's an explosion from a consumer perspective in the app stores of applications that people are using for different purposes. Not many organizations have become successful. I'd say successful is like 5 to 10% of their enterprise supported applications have been refactored for mobile platforms. So, as you're looking at addressing some of these form factors, a lot of times it's about, yeah, we want to move to that native application experience eventually, but we need to have a bridging technology because people need access to OneNote or, SharePoint, those types of things from these other devices. There's an element of data management that comes into play here, right? As the devices become proliferated and they become disposable, centralizing and managing that data and creating a data management strategy becomes important as part of the overall digital workspace. Need to go a little bit faster here because we're running short on time. But there's this element of the future of the digital workspace that I'll just highlight here with some of these things like applied artificial intelligence or machine learning, this whole notion of a digital twin, having a digital representation of a physical object that you can do characteristics and mapping on. I talked about virtual and augmented reality a little bit. And then there's blockchain and some of those other technologies that are being used in things like Bitcoin. I'd like to make a prediction that as it relates to the digital workspace, the security initiatives will soon become the leading driving force for digital workspace adoption. So I've talked a lot about security and how difficult it's becoming for IT to secure and manage data as it's becoming heavily distributed. Centralizing that and creating a common access methodology to that enables security to have tighter control and tighter maintenance of that data. And we all know about WannaCry or WannaCrypt, depending on which article you read, they may call it one or the other. Affected 10,000 organizations. I'm confident many in this conference or trade show have been affected in some way or another by WannaCry. 200,000 individuals were affected. Over 150 countries were affected. This was an NSA exploit that came out into the wild and ran its terror on both businesses as well as consumers. And if you got it, you probably saw something like this that basically said all of your files have been encrypted and good luck getting them back. You've got this ticking time bomb before we completely lock you out of them forever. And in order to unlock them, you need to send us this money via Bitcoin. It's a common ransomware type of attack, and it's becoming more common. And so security is the driving force for all of this stuff. So let's talk about some of the benefits. Again, I mentioned greater flexibility, better security and privacy, increased manageability, ultimately lower costs. And why do you need to move to this now? Your customers are expecting agility. As they're becoming more and more acquainted with consumerization on the personal front, they're expecting that same experience when they're interacting with organizations, whether they're government or they're in the commercial or enterprise side. We have a lot of legacy infrastructure that we've been toting around for decades, right? And that legacy infrastructure creates this thing that we call technical debt, where it's a lot of stuff that needs to be done, a lot of investments that are made, not having a lot of ability to move things forward because of all this cruft that we've been carrying around for such a long time. Employees are on the move, like I mentioned. Mobility is increasing and is going to continue to increase, and we need to be agile as IT mindshare, if you will, to address these things. So it's transitioning the way we work now and in the future. More and more employees within organizations are looking for self-service. They want their own pick-your-own-destiny type of experience when it comes to interacting with IT and services that are delivered via IT. They want app and data fluidity. They want to have similar context regardless of what devices they're on, so that they know that this is the workflow that I go through in order to get to this application, to get to this data, in order to get that output that I need to share with a colleague or whatever that scenario may be. There's the cloud platforms and AI. So we need to have training modules, app catalogs. We need to have Office 365 seamless movement across mobile and desktop devices, contextual awareness. Artificial intelligence and VR and AR is going to affect all of this significantly, being able to provide value back to the business through computational, deep learning, things like that. We also will leverage chatbots in the future. I don't know if you guys have seen the Microsoft thing that they put together about real-time translation, to be able to have a device that you speak into in your native language, you push a button and it real-time translates that to another language. More and more our organizations and the workspaces that people interact with technology, they're going to want to just be able to say something like they would in Dragon dictation and actually have a set of functions or a workflow that's carried out as a result of that dictation that they're providing. So chatbots and big data and the learning that's provided, the insights, if you will, from deep learning, provide the ability for these chatbots to be affected. So there's a couple components of the digital workspace. Again, this isn't about one particular point technology. It's about a holistic strategy, and these technologies fit together to form that strategy. Server-hosted virtual desktops is a critical component. Many organizations are adopting these in large-scale deployments. Desktops as a service or workspaces as a service provides an optimal financial model for this. If you have seasonality in your business, you need to ramp things up very quickly and then peel them back, or you just want better manageability and flexibility instead of IT having to own everything and support everything. Remote desktops or session-hosted desktops, so using a server OS in the traditional terminal server type of experience to create a mainframe with an endpoint, dumb terminal type of scenario. Remote access to physical desktops, so go to my PC and those types of experiences, but enabling that for more of your traditional workstations that sit in cubicles or office spaces, enabling people to securely connect in with all the context, with all the security that IT needs, and access that physical device that's in their office the same way that they would if they were sitting in front of it. Localized virtual desktops, so containerization, again, that whole contractor use case of not wanting to ship out laptops that are corporately maintained or organizationally maintained to contractors or temporary workforce, being able to deploy virtual machines into their personal systems and have them be securely managed, but at any point you could kill the VM and they no longer are able to power it on. Those types of things are becoming more common for contractor use cases. Application virtualization and layering, just creating a capability for the organization to have more flexibility with the way that they deliver their applications to these operating systems and the devices. Mobile workspaces, or sometimes it's called app refactoring, taking a Windows application, an application that was meant to be displayed on a standard PC monitor, 1080p type of experience, and refactoring that application so you pull certain UI elements to factor it for that specific mobile device. So if you're doing time entry or expense keeping, you can pull from your CRM system specific UI elements and then have a refactored application for that mobile device without entirely rewriting the front end for that. And then native software as a service. I'm almost certain that every organization in this show is talking about, has deployed, or is planning to deploy things like Office 365. It's becoming a lot more common. A lot of organizations are looking to shift some of the burden or responsibility. And with Office 365, depending on how you deploy it, many times you don't know what version of Exchange you're running on. You don't have Exchange administrators, right? Microsoft is handling that. You're paying for a subscription service, and they're taking care of that for you. Enterprise mobility management as well becomes a factor for this. So last slide, and then I'll let you guys go. So getting started with the transformation, obviously this is a journey. It's more of a marathon, not a sprint, right? Creating a digital workspace strategy takes organizations often months and sometimes years to create all of those right elements that will move things forward. You have to understand the advantages and the disadvantages of different ways of applying technology to address those business outcomes. You have to evaluate the different vendor solutions that are out there. Like I mentioned, there's a bunch of different elements of this digital workspace, and there's probably 5 to 10 vendors in each one of those elements that has specific purpose with that offering. You have to know your use cases and your work styles. So this is where the business analyst that has a technical background comes into play here, right? Understanding what are those workflows that people are going through every day interacting with technology. What are those roadblocks that they're running into that are technical roadblocks that add to the amount of time that it takes them to do their job? When you're able to remove those roadblocks through technology innovation, it really improves productivity and gives them a better experience. This goes through, interviewing your stakeholders and going through workflow assessments, like I mentioned. In the healthcare space, we have a healthcare workflow consultant that has a background in the medical space and can go out and talk with the doctors and nurses and practitioners about their workflows and how they're interacting with technology. So having that knowledge around their workflow helps you when you go to position new technologies to make sure that they meet those needs. Understand the technical management organization and how willing the technical management team is to adopt new technologies and move the ball forward. A lot of times organizations have really brilliant minds that whether it's the business leadership or technology leadership, there's just roadblocks that come up. This type of strategy often bubbles to the surface skills gaps that you may have within your organization. So we are here, this is our status quo, we need to get to there. In order to do that, there's capabilities and skills that we need from a certification training perspective to help our team become ready for this new wave of dealing with technology. Understanding and then prioritizing the business outcomes. Are you driving a security initiative? Are you driving a productivity initiative? Are you driving a mobile initiative? These are things that you need to identify and then prioritize. And then finally, and this is ultimately our role in all of this and how we work with our customers and organizations daily, understand who your trusted advisors are and who can help walk with you on this journey, because it's not going to be something that you're going to pick up and be able to deploy in 3 to 5 days. This is a transitionary period. It's something that is constantly iterating, and it's something that constantly needs to be tuned. So having organizations that you can trust that can walk with you in that process is really helpful. So I apologize. I know I ran late, but if you guys have any questions, we can talk outside, and I'll turn over the room to the next presenter. So thank you, guys. Appreciate it.